Chapter 3 of 17. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jonathan Burchard, April 2009. 17 by Booth Tarkington. Chapter 3. The Painful Age.
Oh, Willie!
Thus a shrill voice, to his ears hideously different from that other, interrupted and dispersed his visions. Little Jane, his 10-year-old sister, stood upon the front porch. The door opened behind her, and in her hand she held a large slab of bread and butter, covered with apple sauce and powdered sugar. Evidence that she had sampled this compound was upon her cheeks, and to her brother she was a repulsive sight.
Willie! She shrilled. Look! Good!
And to emphasize the adjective, she indelicately patted the region of her body in which she believed her stomach to be located.
There's a slice for you on the dining-room table, she informed him joyously.
Outraged, he entered the house without a word to her, and proceeding to the dining-room, laid hands upon the slice she had mentioned, but declined to eat it in Jane's company. He was in an exalted mood, and though in no condition of mind or body would he refuse food of almost any kind, Jane was an intrusion he could not suffer at this time. He carried the refection to his own room, and locking the door, sat down to eat, while, even as he ate, the spell that was upon him deepened in intensity. "Oh, eyes!" he whispered softly, in that cool privacy and shelter from the world. "Oh, eyes of blue!" The mirror of a dressing-table sent him the reflection of his own eyes, which also were blue, and he gazed upon them and upon the rest of his image the while he ate his bread and butter and apple sauce and sugar. Thus watching himself eat, he continued to stare dreamily at the mirror until the bread and butter and apple sauce and sugar had disappeared, whereupon he rose and approached the dressing-table to study himself at greater advantage. He assumed as repulsive an expression as he could command, at the same time making the kingly gesture of one who repels unwelcome attentions, and it is beyond doubt that he was thus acting a little scene of indifference. Other symbolic dramas followed, though an invisible observer might have been puzzled for a key to some of them. One, however, would have proved easily intelligible. His expression having altered to a look of pity and contrition, he turned from the mirror, and walking slowly to a chair across the room, used his right hand in a peculiar manner, seeming to stroke the chair at a point about 10 inches above the back of the chair. "There, there, little girl," he said in a low, gentle voice. "I didn't know you cared." Then, with a rather abrupt dismissal of this theme, he returned to the mirror, and after a questioning scrutiny, nodded solemnly, forming with his lips the words, "The real thing at last." He meant that after many imitations had imposed upon him, love, the real thing, had come to him in the end, and as he turned away, he murmured, "And even her name, unknown." This evidently was a thought that continued to occupy him, for he walked up and down the room frowning. But suddenly his brow cleared and his eye lit with purpose. Seating himself at a small writing-table by the window, he proceeded to express his personality, though with considerable labor, in something which he did not doubt to be a poem. 3/4 of an hour having sufficed for its completion, including rewriting and polish, he solemnly signed it, and then read it several times in a state of hushed astonishment. He had never dreamed he could do anything like this. "Milady, I do not know her name, though it would be the same where roses bloom at twilight and the lark takes his flight. It would be the same anywhere where music sounds in air. I was never introduced to the lady, so I could not call her lass or Sadie. So I will call her Milady. By the sands of the sea, she'll always be just Milady to me." Signed, William Sylvanus Baxter, Esquire, July 14th. It is impossible to say how many times he might have read the poem over, always with increasing amazement at his new-found powers, had he not been interrupted by the odious voice of Jane.
Willie!
To William, in his high and lonely mood, this piercing summons brought an actual shudder, and the very thought of Jane, with tokens of apple sauce and sugar still upon her cheek probably, seemed a kind of sacrilege. He fiercely swore his favourite oath, acquired from the hero of a work of fiction he admired. Ye gods! And concealed his poem in the drawer of the writing-table, for Jane's footsteps were approaching his door.
"Willie! Mamma wants you!"
She tried the handle of the door. "G'way!" he said.
Willie!
Jane hammered upon the door with her fist.
Willie!
"What you want?" he shouted. Jane explained, certain pauses indicating that her attention was partially diverted to another slice of bread and butter and applesauce and sugar.
Willie, Mama wants you. Wants you to go help Genesis bring some washtubs home in a tin clothes boiler from the second-hand men's store.
What? Jane repeated the outrageous message, adding,
She wants you to hurry, and I got some more bread and butter and applesauce and sugar for coming to tell you.
William left no doubt in Jane's mind about his attitude in reference to the whole matter. His refusal was direct and infuriated, but, in the midst of a multitude of plain statements which he was making, there was a decisive tapping upon the door at a point higher than Jane could reach, and his mother's voice interrupted.
"Hush, Willie! Open the door, please."
He obeyed furiously, and Mrs. Baxter walked in with a deprecating air, while Jane followed, so profoundly interested that, until almost the close of the interview, she held her bread and butter and applesauce and sugar at a sort of way station on its journey to her mouth. "That's a nice thing to ask me to do!" stormed the unfortunate William. "Ye gods, do you think that Joe Bullitt's mother would dare to—" "Wait, dearie," Mrs. Baxter begged pacifically. "I just want to explain." "Explain? Ye gods!" Now, just a minute, Willie," she said. "What I wanted to explain was why it's necessary for you to go with Genesis for the—" "Never!" he shouted. "Never! You expect me to walk through the public streets with that awful-looking old nigger? Genesis isn't old," she managed to interpolate. But her frantic son disregarded her. "Second-hand wash-tubs," he vociferated, "and tin clothes boilers! That's what you want your son to carry through the public streets in broad daylight? Ye gods!" "Well, there isn't anybody else," she said. "Please don't rave so, Willie, and say 'ye gods' so much. It really isn't nice. I'm sure nobody'll notice you." "Nobody?" His voice cracked in anguish. "Oh, no, nobody except the whole town. Why, when there's anything disgusting has to be done in this family, why do I always have to be the one? Why can't Genesis bring the second-hand washtubs without me? Why can't the second-hand store deliver 'em? Why can't—" "That's what I want to tell you," she interposed hurriedly, and as the youth lifted his arms on high in a gesture of ultimate despair, and then threw himself miserably into a chair, she obtained the floor. "The second-hand store doesn't deliver things," she said. "I bought them at an auction, and it's going out of business, and they have to be taken away before 4:30 this afternoon. Genesis can't bring them in the wheelbarrow because, he says, the wheel is broken, and he says he can't possibly carry 2 tubs and a wash boiler himself. And he can't make 2 trips because it's 1.5 miles, and I don't like to ask him anyway, and it would take too long because he has to get back and finish cutting the grass before your papa gets home this evening. Papa said he had to. Now, I don't like to ask you, but it really isn't much. You and Genesis can just slip up there and—" "Slip?" moaned William. "Just slip up there? Ye gods!" "Genesis is waiting on the back porch," she said. "Really, it isn't worth your making all this fuss about." "Oh, no," he returned with plaintive satire. "It's nothing. Nothing at all." "Why, I shouldn't mind it," she said briskly, "if I had the time. In fact, I'll have to if you won't." Ye gods! He clasped his head in his hands, crushed, for he knew that the curse was upon him, and he must go. Ye gods! And then, as he stamped to the door, his tragic eye fell upon Jane, and he emitted a final cry of pain. "Can't you ever wash your face?" he shouted. End of chapter 3.